I didn't ask her to hold me like that. I only asked her to pretend. But when her fingers tangled in my hair and she pulled me close right in front of the girl who had just shattered my heart, the careful script we had written completely burst into flames. If you love a good fake dating romance with intense drama, undeniable chemistry, and twists you won't see coming, please hit that subscribe button, leave a huge like, and tell me in the comments who you think will fall in love first. Your support helps make these stories possible. Now let's dive right into the story. Part 1. The bass of the music was vibrating through the floorboards, matching the anxious, erratic rhythm of my own heartbeat. I stood near the edge of the crowded living room, gripping my plastic cup so tightly I was surprised it hadn't cracked and spilled cheap fruit punch all over my favorite black jeans. I shouldn't have come. Everyone told me it was a bad idea, but my stubborn pride had convinced me that staying home on a Friday night would be admitting defeat. I was Maya, the girl who was supposed to be completely fine. The girl who had totally moved on. Except I hadn't. Not even a little bit. Across the dimly lit room, framed by the flashing neon lights of the makeshift dance floor, stood Chloe. My ex-girlfriend. The girl who had sworn she needed time to figure herself out just 3 weeks ago, only to apparently figure out that what she actually needed was the captain of the women's volleyball team. Chloe was laughing, her head thrown back, as the impossibly tall and athletic Sarah wrapped an arm around her waist. Sarah leaned in and whispered something in Chloe's ear, making her smile that specific radiant smile that used to belong entirely to me. It felt like someone had slipped a thin blade between my ribs. The physical ache of heartbreak was so real it made it hard to draw a full breath. I needed to leave. I needed to turn around, walk out the front door, and disappear into the cool autumn night before she saw me. But my feet felt like they were cast in concrete. "You're staring again, Maya." The voice came from beside me, smooth, low, and distinctly unimpressed. I jumped slightly, spilling a few drops of my drink onto my hand. I turned to see Elara leaning against the wall, observing me with a pair of piercing dark brown eyes. Elara was a mystery wrapped in a vintage leather jacket. We shared a few classes, but we ran in completely different circles. She was the brooding, effortlessly cool art major who always seemed to be sketching something in the back row, surrounded by an aura of unapproachable intimidation. She had sharp features, dark wavy hair that fell just past her shoulders, and an attitude that screamed she didn't have time for anyone's nonsense. "I'm not staring," I lied quickly, wiping my sticky hand on my jeans. "I was just looking at the lighting in here." Very dramatic. Elara let out a short, cynical laugh. She took a sip from her own cup, never taking her eyes off me. "Right. The lighting. It definitely has nothing to do with your ex over there practically swallowing the volleyball captain." I felt my cheeks flush with heat. "Do you mind?" "It's really none of your business." "It's not," she agreed easily, shrugging her shoulders. "But watching you stand here looking like a kicked puppy is depressing me. It's ruining the vibe of my thoroughly mediocre evening." I opened my mouth to shoot back a defensive reply, but the words died in my throat. Across the room, Chloe's eyes had suddenly locked onto mine. The laughter died on her face, replaced by a look of surprised pity. Pity. That was the worst part. She whispered something to Sarah, and then, to my absolute horror, they both started walking toward me. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my veins. "Oh no," I muttered, my breath hitching. She's coming over. She's coming over here to do the whole "I'm so glad we can still be friends" routine while holding her new girlfriend's hand. I can't do this. I cannot do this right now. I looked around frantically for an escape route, but the hallway was blocked by a group of loud freshmen, and the kitchen was packed. I was trapped. "Breathe, Maya," Elara said, her voice suddenly losing its mocking edge, replaced by something sharper. "You're going to hyperventilate." "I need an excuse," I rambled, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I need a reason to look like I'm not a pathetic loser who came here alone to stalk her ex. I need a distraction." They were only 10 feet away now. Chloe was preparing her gentle, condescending smile. My mind went entirely blank. Flight or fight kicked in, and my brain inexplicably chose something entirely different. Without thinking, driven by pure, unadulterated desperation, I turned to Elara. I reached out, grabbing the lapels of her leather jacket, and pulled her toward me. "Play along," I whispered frantically, my face inches from hers. For a fraction of a second, Elara's eyes widened in surprise. But before I could second-guess my insane decision, her expression smoothed into something dangerously calm. "Maya?" "Hey," Chloe's voice floated over, laced with artificial sweetness. I didn't turn around immediately. I kept my eyes locked on Elara, waiting for her to push me away, to laugh at me, to expose my pathetic lie. Instead, Elara's arm slid around my waist. The warmth of her hand seared through the thin fabric of my shirt. She pulled me flush against her side, her thumb gently tracing the curve of my hip. It was an incredibly intimate gesture, executed with terrifying naturalness. Only then did I turn my head, plastering on the brightest, most fake smile I could muster. "Chloe!" "Hey! I didn't see you there." Chloe stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes darting from my face down to Elara's hand resting securely on my hip, and then up to Elara's face. Sarah stood awkwardly beside her, suddenly looking less like a victorious conqueror and more like a confused bystander. Hi," Chloe stammered, clearly thrown off balance. Her gaze lingered on Elara, taking in the leather jacket, the confident posture, the intense, unwavering stare. "I didn't know you were seeing someone." "We're keeping it low-key," Elara answered before I could even open my mouth. Her voice was smooth like velvet, dripping with an easy, arrogant charm I had no idea she possessed. She looked down at me, the corners of her lips curling into an affectionate smile that looked so real it made my stomach do a strange flip. "Right, babe. Babe." The word sent a shockwave straight down my spine. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to nod. "Yeah. Yes. Exactly. We just wanted to enjoy the night." Chloe's fake smile faltered. Pity in her eyes vanished, instantly replaced by a flash of something else. Confusion? Jealousy? I couldn't tell, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't care. A small spark of triumphant satisfaction ignited in my chest. "Well," Chloe said, her voice slightly tight, "it's good to see you moving on, Maya. Sarah and I were just going to get some air." "Nice meeting you," Elara said dismissively, not even bothering to look at Sarah. She turned her attention back to me, reaching up to gently brush a stray lock of hair behind my ear. Her fingertips grazed my cheek, sending another jolt of electricity through my nervous system. "Do you want to get out of here, darling? The music is giving me a headache." "Yes," I breathed, entirely lost in the performance. "Let's go." Elara kept her arm firmly around my waist as she guided me through the crowded room. I could feel Chloe's eyes burning holes into our backs the entire way to the front door. We stepped out into the crisp autumn air, the heavy bass of the party instantly muffled as the front door clicked shut behind us. We walked in silence until we reached the end of the block, standing under the flickering yellow light of a street lamp. As soon as we were out of sight, Elara dropped her arm from my waist and took a step back. The sudden absence of her warmth left me feeling strangely cold. "I am so sorry," I blurted out immediately, wrapping my arms around myself to ward off the chill. I completely lost my mind. I panicked. I couldn't stand the way she was looking at me. "You didn't have to do that." Elara pulled a pack of gum from her pocket, popping a piece into her mouth before offering it to me. I shook my head. She leaned back against the brick wall of a nearby building, studying me intently. "You're a terrible liar, Maya," she said flatly. I winced. Was it that obvious? To anyone with a functioning brain, yes. You looked like you were being held hostage. But your ex seems entirely too self-absorbed to notice the finer details. She crossed her arms over her chest. "However, your little stunt did give me an idea." I blinked, confused by the sudden shift in her tone. "An idea? What do you mean?" Elara sighed, looking up at the night sky for a moment before fixing her dark eyes back on me. I have a problem. A rather annoying, persistent family problem. Next weekend is my older sister's wedding. It's a 3-day, excruciatingly formal affair out in the Hamptons. My entire extended family will be there, and their favorite blood sport is interrogating me about my directionless life and my complete lack of a stable relationship. I frowned, not seeing where this was going. Okay. And, Elara continued, her gaze narrowing, if I show up alone again, I will be subjected to endless pitying looks and aggressive matchmaking attempts by my mother. I need a buffer. I need someone to smile, look pretty, and pretend to be entirely devoted to me so they'll back off. My jaw dropped slightly as the realization hit me. You want me to be your fake girlfriend for a wedding? It's a mutually beneficial transaction, Elara reasoned, her tone entirely businesslike. You clearly need a way to prove to your ex that you've moved on and upgraded. I need a shield to survive my family. You play my loving girlfriend for the weekend, and in return, I will continue to be the devoted, incredibly attractive new partner who will make your ex regret every life choice she's ever made. I stared at her, my mind spinning. This was insane. This was the kind of thing that happened in bad romantic comedies, not in real life. Elara and I didn't even know each other. We were complete opposites. Spending a weekend pretending to be deeply in love with the most intimidating girl on campus sounded like a recipe for absolute disaster. But then I thought about Chloe. I thought about the smug look on her face, the way she paraded Sarah around like a trophy. I thought about the sharp sting of rejection, and how Elara's arm around my waist was the only thing that had made me feel empowered in weeks. 3 days? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Friday evening to Sunday afternoon, Elara confirmed. We establish some ground rules, we get our story straight, and we act like we're painfully in love. Once the weekend is over, we go back to pretending the other doesn't exist. Clean, simple, transactional. I looked into her dark, unreadable eyes. There was no warmth there, no hint of a joke. She was completely serious. This was a business deal. Nothing more, nothing less. It was safe. It was controlled. Okay, I heard myself say, the words slipping out before I could stop it. Okay. Deal. Elara's lips curved into a small, calculating smirk. She pushed herself off the brick wall and closed the distance between us, stopping just a few inches away. Good. We have a lot of work to do, Maya. If we're going to pull this off, we have to make them believe it. She reached out, and for a second I thought she was going to touch my face again. My breath caught in my throat. Instead, she simply straightened the collar of my jacket, her knuckles brushing briefly against my collarbone. See you tomorrow, she said softly, turning on her heel and walking away into the darkness, leaving me standing under the flickering street lamp with a racing heart and the terrifying realization that I had just made a deal with the devil. End of Part 1. Part 2. Saturday morning arrived with the subtlety of a freight train. Sunlight pierced through the gaps in my blinds, directly hitting my eyes and forcing me awake to face the immediate crushing weight of my own decisions. I groaned, pulling my pillow over my head. Last night wasn't a weird, punch-induced fever dream. I had actually agreed to be the fake girlfriend of Elara Vance, the most intimidating, enigmatic girl on campus, for an entire weekend at a high-society Hamptons wedding. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I reached out blindly, knocking over a half-empty glass of water before my fingers found the device. It was a text from an unknown number. The Roasted Bean. Corner of 4th and Elm. 1 hour. Don't be late. I stared at the screen. She didn't even ask if I was awake or free. She just commanded. A part of me wanted to text back and cancel the whole ridiculous arrangement, to blame it on momentary insanity and crawl back under my covers to mourn my breakup in peace. But then I remembered the look on Chloe's face when Elara had wrapped her arm around my waist. The shock. The sudden realization that I wasn't just sitting at home crying over her. That single memory was enough to pull me out of bed. 55 minutes later, I pushed open the heavy glass door of the roasted bean. The smell of freshly ground espresso and baked pastries washed over me. Cafe was relatively quiet, filled mostly with students hunched over laptops. I spotted her immediately. Elara was sitting in a booth tucked away in the back corner. She wore a dark, oversized knit sweater that somehow managed to look like high fashion on her, and her dark wavy hair was tied up in a messy, effortless bun. She was writing something in a black leather-bound notebook, her brow slightly furrowed in concentration. She had a black coffee in front of her. No milk, no sugar. Of course. I took a deep breath to steady my nerves and walked over, sliding into the booth opposite her. "You're exactly on time," Elara said without looking up from her notebook. "I appreciate punctuality." "I aim to please," I muttered sarcastically, shrugging off my jacket. "So, what exactly is the plan here?" Because I woke up this morning convinced I hallucinated our entire conversation. Elara finally looked up, her dark eyes pinning me to my seat. She closed the notebook and slid it to the center of the table. "I don't hallucinate, Maya. I strategize. If we are going to survive 3 days with my family without them tearing us apart like a pack of well-dressed wolves, we need a flawless narrative." "Wolves?" I echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Isn't that a bit dramatic?" Elara leaned forward, resting her arms on the table. "My mother is a corporate lawyer who views weakness as a personal insult. My older sister, the bride, is a perfectionist who has planned this wedding for 2 years and will actively look for flaws to distract from her own anxiety. My extended family's primary hobby is judging people. If they sense even a fraction of hesitation between us, they will interrogate you until you crack. We have to be airtight." I swallowed hard. "Okay. Airtight. How do we do that?" "By establishing the ground rules and getting our facts straight," she said, tapping the notebook with her index finger. "Rule number 1, public displays of affection are mandatory. Holding hands, casual touches, sitting close. If you pull away or flinch every time I touch you, the game is over before it begins. You were rigid last night. You need to relax around me." "I was rigid because you terrified me," I pointed out honestly. "You still kind of do." A fleeting, genuine smile tugged at the corner of Elara's mouth. Changed her entire face, softening her sharp features and making my breath catch in my throat for a fraction of a second. "I'll try to be less terrifying. But the point stands. We need to be comfortable with physical proximity." To prove her point, she reached across the table and placed her hand flat over mine. Her skin was warm, her fingers long and slender. An electric jolt shot up my arm at the sudden contact. My instinct was to pull away, but her gaze held mine, challenging me. I forced my hand to stay still, even as my heart rate picked up an entirely unnecessary speed. "See? That wasn't so hard," she murmured, her thumb lightly brushing my knuckles before she slowly pulled her hand back. I immediately missed the warmth. Rule number 2, we need to know each other. The basics, the quirks, the annoying habits. If my aunt asks what your favorite movie is, I need to know the answer instantly. So let's start. For the next 2 hours, we sat in that booth, turning our lives into flashcards. I learned that Elara grew up in Manhattan, hated the smell of lavender, was allergic to shellfish, and played the piano beautifully but refused to do it in front of people. I learned that beneath her cold, sarcastic exterior was a fiercely protective streak, mostly aimed at her younger brother who was currently studying abroad. In turn, I told her about my hometown in Ohio, my bizarre obsession with terrible sci-fi movies, my fear of deep water, and my habit of chewing on my lower lip when I was anxious. I told her about my major in English literature and how I wanted to be a publisher. "And Chloe?" Elara asked suddenly, taking a sip of her coffee. The name felt like a cold splash of water. "How long were you two together?" "1.5 years," I said quietly, looking down at the wooden table. I thought we were really good. But then she started spending more time at the gym, hanging out with Sarah, and suddenly she needed space. 3 days later, they were official. "She's an idiot," Elara stated matter-of-factly. There was no pity in her voice, just an objective observation. She traded someone genuine for someone whose primary personality trait is wearing athletic tape. It's a downgrade. I looked up, surprised by the blunt defense. "Thank you, I think." "Don't thank me, it's just a fact." Elara waved off the comment, looking back at her notebook. "All right, our meeting story. How did we fall in love?" "We didn't," I reminded her. "We are fake falling in love." Semantics. What's the narrative? We decided on a story that was close enough to the truth to be believable. We were in the same art history seminar. I dropped my pen, it rolled under her desk, our hands brushed when we both reached for it. Classic, slightly cliché, but undeniably effective. We spent the rest of the semester trading quiet glances until I finally worked up the courage to ask her out for coffee. "We need to test it," Elara announced suddenly, closing the notebook and sliding it into her leather messenger bag. "Test what?" "The story." "The dynamic," she corrected, standing up and tossing a $5 bill onto the table. "Monday morning. The main quad. We debut the relationship to the general public. It will serve a dual purpose. Practicing for my family and making sure your ex gets a front row seat to your newfound happiness." Monday morning came faster than I anticipated. The autumn air was crisp, and the campus was swarming with students rushing to their early classes. I stood by the large oak tree near the library, nervously adjusting the strap of my backpack. I was chewing on my lower lip so hard it was starting to ache. "You're doing that thing." I spun around. Elara was standing there, looking devastatingly cool in a long wool coat and dark denim. She stepped directly into my personal space, reaching up to gently pull my lower lip from between my teeth with her thumb. Touch was so intimate, so unexpected, that my brain entirely short-circuited. "Anxious?" she asked softly, her eyes dropping to my mouth for a split second before meeting my gaze. "A little," I breathed, my voice sounding incredibly unsteady. "Don't be. Just follow my lead." Elara didn't give me time to overthink. She reached down and intertwined her fingers with mine. Her grip was firm, grounding. A sudden, terrifying thrill washed over me. We started walking down the main path of the quad, completely in sync. Felt strange, yet undeniably natural. Heads turned as we walked by. Elara Vance never held anyone's hand. Elara Vance barely acknowledged other people's existence. And yet, here she was, her fingers locked with mine, leaning in close as we walked. 10 o'clock, Elara murmured quietly, her lips brushing my ear. "Don't look immediately." I waited a beat, then casually glanced to my left. Sitting on a stone bench outside the science building, surrounded by her volleyball teammates, was Chloe. She was mid-laugh, but as we walked past, her eyes caught mine. The laugh abruptly stopped. Her gaze dropped down to our intertwined hands, and I saw her posture stiffen visibly. "Smile, darling," Elara whispered. I looked up at Elara, offering her a genuine, brilliant smile. Elara stopped walking. Right there, in the middle of the crowded quad, in full view of Chloe and half the student body. "What are you?" I started to ask, but the words were cut off. Elara reached up with her free hand, cupping the side of my face. She leaned down, moving slowly, deliberately. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. For a terrifying, exhilarating moment, I thought she was going to kiss me on the lips. The air between us cracked with a sudden, overwhelming tension. I couldn't breathe. I didn't want to breathe. Instead, she turned her head at the last possible second, pressing her lips softly against my temple. She lingered there, her breath warm against my skin. It was a perfectly executed display of deep, quiet affection. It looked incredibly private, yet devastatingly public. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were dark and intense. "You're supposed to look like you're in love with me, Maya," she murmured, loud enough for only me to hear. "Try not to look so terrified." I'm not terrified, I lied, my voice shaking slightly. Elara smirked, a dangerous, beautiful expression. Good. Because the weekend hasn't even started yet. She squeezed my hand and we kept walking, leaving Chloe staring open-mouthed behind us. We had just set the stage, and as the thrill of the performance coursed through my veins, a terrifying thought echoed in my mind. Playing pretend with Elara Vance was going to be dangerously easy and incredibly hard to walk away from. End of Part 2. Part 3. The rest of the week blurred into a chaotic mix of frantic packing, unfinished term papers, and a lingering sense of impending doom. By the time Friday afternoon rolled around, my nerves were completely frayed. I stood on the sidewalk outside my dorm, clutching a slightly battered duffel bag and a garment bag containing a dress I had bought at a thrift store and frantically prayed looked expensive enough for the Hamptons. Exactly at 4 o'clock, a sleek, terrifyingly polished black SUV pulled up to the curb. The tinted window rolled down, revealing Elara wearing a pair of dark sunglasses and a crisp white button-down shirt that made her look like she was born to inhabit a country club. "Get in," she said, popping the trunk. I hauled my bags into the back and climbed into the passenger seat. The interior of the car smelled like expensive leather and a hint of the sandalwood perfume Elara always wore. It was an intoxicating, overwhelming combination that immediately made my heart rate spike. "You look like you're heading to an execution," Elara noted dryly as she merged onto the highway, leaving the familiar safety of the campus behind us. "I feel like I'm heading to an execution," I admitted, my fingers twisting the strap of my seatbelt. "I've never been to the Hamptons. My idea of a fancy vacation is when my parents splurge on the name-brand snacks for a road trip to a national park. If your family asks me about yachting or the stock market, I'm going to spontaneously combust." Elara let out a soft, unexpectedly genuine laugh. The sound sent a warm ripple through my chest. "You don't need to know about yachting, Maya. You just need to know about me. Remember the flashcards?" "I memorized the flashcards," I replied, staring out the window as the cityscape gave way to sprawling suburbs and eventually coastal highways. "I know you hate lavender, you're allergic to shellfish, and you secretly cried at the end of that animated movie about the robot." "Keep your voice down," Elara warned playfully, though a faint hint of color touched her cheeks. "If my mother finds out I possess human emotions, she'll use it as leverage in my next trust fund negotiation." Noted. Emotional repression is the Vance family currency. We drove for another 2 hours. Tension that had been thick between us at the beginning of the week had slowly dissolved into a comfortable, easy silence. Closer we got to the eastern end of Long Island, the more the architecture shifted into sprawling, immaculately manicured estates hidden behind towering hedges and wrought iron gates. Finally, Elara turned off the main road onto a long, winding gravel driveway lined with ancient oak trees. The end of the driveway sat a house that looked less like a home and more like a coastal fortress. It was a massive 3-story stone mansion with sweeping ocean views, a perfectly manicured lawn, and at least a dozen luxury cars parked near the entrance. My stomach dropped to my shoes. "Elara, you didn't tell me your family lived in a castle." "It's not a castle," she said dismissively, putting the car in park. She turned to look at me, taking off her sunglasses. Her dark eyes were serious, the playful banter of the car ride completely gone. "Listen to me. The minute we step out of this car, the performance begins. They are going to look for cracks. They are going to test you. Do not let them intimidate you." "Easy for you to say," I breathed, my hands visibly shaking. Elara noticed. Without a word, she reached across the center console and took both of my hands in hers. Her grip was firm, grounding me in the immediate reality of the confined space. "Look at me, Maya." I forced my eyes up to meet hers. "You are incredibly smart, you are quick on your feet, and you are the only person who hasn't completely backed down from me this entire semester," she said, her voice low and steady. "You belong here right now because I chose you to be here. If they cross a line, I will handle it. But until then, you are my girlfriend, and you are completely unfazed by their tax brackets. Understood?" The sheer intensity of her gaze, combined with the warmth of her hands wrapped around mine, sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through my system. I nodded, taking a deep, shuddering breath. Understood. Good. She let go of my hands, leaving my skin tingling, and stepped out of the car. The moment we walked through the massive double front doors, the chaos of a high-society wedding hit us like a physical wall. Event planners were rushing around with clipboards, caterers were carrying trays of crystal glassware, and loud voices echoed from the drawing room down the hall. Elara! You finally decided to grace us with your presence. The voice sliced through the noise like a perfectly sharpened blade. I turned to see a woman descending the grand staircase. She was the older, terrifyingly elegant version of Elara. Elara Vance wore a tailored silk pantsuit, her silver hair pulled back into a severe chignon. Her eyes, the same dark brown as Elara's, locked onto me with the precision of a sniper scope. Elara immediately shifted, stepping slightly closer to me. Her arms snaked around my waist, pulling me firmly against her side. Mother! We hit some traffic on the Long Island Expressway. Eleanor reached the bottom of the stairs, coming to a halt directly in front of us. She didn't look at Elara. She looked at me. She started at my scuffed combat boots, dragged her gaze up my sensible jeans, and finally settled on my face. The judgment was silent, but it was deafening. And this must be the new development, Eleanor said smoothly. The word development sounded suspiciously like temporary distraction. This is Maya, Elara corrected, her tone laced with a quiet, dangerous warning. She pulled me a fraction of an inch closer. Maya, this is my mother, Eleanor. I remembered Elara's words in the car. Do not let them intimidate you. I forced my shoulders back, plastered on a polite smile, and held my hand out. It's wonderful to meet you, Mrs. Vance. Elara has told me so much about you. Eleanor looked at my outstretched hand for a long, agonizing second before briefly grasping it. Her grip was cold and firm. Has she? How unusual. Elara is typically so fiercely protective of her private life. I must admit, we were all quite surprised when she mentioned she was bringing a guest. You seem quite different from the people my daughter usually associates with. It was a thinly veiled insult, wrapping my lack of obvious wealth in a polite observation. I felt Elara tense beside me, her jaw clenching, ready to defend me. But I beat her to it. I suppose I am, I agreed cheerfully, refusing to break eye contact with Eleanor. But Elara and I bonded over our art history seminar. It's amazing what a shared appreciation for Renaissance architecture can do to bridge the gap between different social circles, don't you think? Eleanor's perfectly arched eyebrows twitched in surprise. She clearly hadn't expected me to hit back with an intellectual reference. Elara's arm tightened around my waist, and I could feel a faint rumble of amusement vibrating in her chest. Indeed, Eleanor murmured, her gaze turning calculating. Well, you must be exhausted. Maria will show you to your room. The rehearsal dinner begins promptly at 7 in the solarium. Do not be late, Elara. Your sister is already on the verge of a nervous breakdown because the florist brought the wrong shade of white orchids. With a final lingering look at me, Eleanor turned and swept down the hallway. I let out a massive exhale, my entire body sagging against Elara. Oh my God. I survived. Elara turned her head, looking down at me. The icy mask she wore for her mother had completely melted, replaced by a look of absolute, unadulterated awe. Renaissance architecture? Really? It was the first thing that came to my mind, I whispered back, a giddy laugh escaping my lips. Elara's eyes softened, a genuine smile breaking across her face. You were magnificent. Come on. Let's go see the battlefield. We followed a housekeeper up 2 sweeping flights of stairs and down a long, carpeted corridor. She pushed open a heavy oak door, ushering us into a massive guest suite. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the roaring ocean, a fireplace, and elegant antique furniture. And in the center of the room, dominating the space, was a single, massive king-sized bed. I stopped dead in my tracks. My duffel bag slipped from my shoulder, hitting the thick carpet with a soft thud. Elara walked past me, tipping the housekeeper before closing the door firmly behind her. Click of the lock echoed in the sudden silence of the room. I stared at the bed, then back at Elara. One bed. I squeaked, my voice betraying my sudden panic. We have to share a bed? Elara walked over to the bed, dropping her sleek leather overnight bag onto the pristine white duvet. She didn't look fazed in the slightest. It's a guest suite, Maya. My mother isn't running a hostel. Of course there's only one bed. We're supposedly in a serious relationship. I know that, I stammered, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. But we've only ever touched in public. For show. I've never actually slept next to you. Elara paused, unbuttoning the cuffs of her crisp white shirt. She turned to look at me, her dark eyes pinning me to the spot. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Protective, supportive Elara from the hallway was gone, replaced by the intense, magnetic girl who made my heart race in the campus quad. She walked slowly across the room until she was standing just inches away from me. I had to tilt my head up to maintain eye contact. I could smell the sandalwood again, intoxicating and close. Are you afraid of me, Maya? She asked, her voice a low, husky whisper that sent shivers racing down my spine. No, I lied instinctively, though my racing pulse told a completely different story. Elara lifted a hand, her cool fingertips lightly tracing the line of my jaw. My breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't move. I didn't want to move. Good, she murmured, her eyes dropping to my lips for a fraction of a second before meeting my gaze again. Because we have 3 nights in this room. And if my mother is having us watched, which she absolutely is, we need to be convincing behind closed doors too. She let her hand drop, stepping back and instantly breaking the heavy spell that had settled over us. Now, start getting ready. We have a rehearsal dinner to survive, and I need to make sure my sister hasn't actually murdered the florist. I stood there, frozen in the middle of the luxurious room, watching Elara casually unpack her bag. The fake relationship had suddenly become terrifyingly real, and as I looked at the single bed waiting for us, I realized that surviving Elara Vance was going to be the easy part of this weekend. Surviving my growing feelings for Elara Vance in that bed was going to be the real challenge. End of Part 3. Part 4. The bathroom of the guest suite was larger than my entire dorm room, outfitted in floor-to-ceiling white marble with a bathtub that could comfortably fit 3 people. I stood in front of the massive gilded mirror, staring at my reflection and feeling entirely like an imposter. I had bought the dress at a vintage shop off campus. It was a deep, rich emerald green silk that slipped over my curves and fell to mid-calf. It had a cowl neckline and a dangerously low back. In the dingy lighting of the thrift store, I thought it looked sophisticated. Here, bathed in the harsh, expensive glow of the Vance family estate, I was terrified it screamed cheap. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my trembling hands as I reached around to pull the delicate side zipper up. It stubbornly refused to budge past my ribs. I pulled harder, terrified I was going to tear the delicate, decades-old fabric. A sharp knock on the bathroom door made me jump. Maya? We have 10 minutes. Are you decent? Define decent, I called back, my voice laced with frustration. I'm in the dress, but I'm currently in a wrestling match with the zipper, and the zipper is winning. The door handle turned, and Elara stepped into the bathroom. I completely forgot about the zipper. I forgot how to breathe entirely. She was wearing a custom-tailored midnight blue velvet suit. The jacket was perfectly fitted, worn open over a sheer black silk camisole that left just enough to the imagination to be devastating. Her dark hair was styled in soft, cascading waves over one shoulder, and a single, delicate silver chain rested against her collarbone. She looked like a billionaire villain in a spy movie, and I was entirely paralyzed by how painfully attractive she was. Elara stopped a few feet away, her dark eyes slowly dragging from the hem of my emerald dress, up the curve of my waist to my bare shoulders and finally meeting my gaze in the mirror. The air in the bathroom instantly turned heavy and thick. "The zipper," I rasped, pointing awkwardly at my side. "It's stuck." Elara didn't say a word. She closed the distance between us, stepping directly behind me. I watched her in the mirror. Her expression was unreadable, her jaw set, but her eyes were dark and intensely focused. She reached out, her knuckles brushing against the bare skin of my lower back. A violent shiver ripped through my entire body at the contact. "Relax," she murmured, her voice a low vibration that I felt all the way down to my toes. "You're holding your breath, which is pulling the fabric tight." I forced myself to exhale, though my heart was beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Elara's cool fingers expertly gripped the tiny metal zipper. With a smooth, practiced motion, she pulled it up, sealing the silk dress against my side. But she didn't step back immediately. She stayed there, her hands resting lightly on my hips, looking at my reflection over my shoulder. The dark blue velvet of her suit brushed against the bright green silk of my dress. Contrast was striking. We looked exactly like the power couple we were pretending to be. "You look," Elara started, her voice sounding strangely strained. She cleared her throat, her mask of cool indifference sliding perfectly back into place. "You look perfectly acceptable. The color suits you." "Just acceptable?" I teased, fueled by a sudden reckless surge of confidence. I was aiming for devastatingly gorgeous. Elara's lips twitched. She dropped her hands from my hips and took a step back, breaking the magnetic field between us. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Save the devastatingly gorgeous routine for my Aunt Beatrice. She's the one you really need to impress." The rehearsal dinner was held in the estate's solarium, a massive glass structure overflowing with exotic plants, illuminated by thousands of twinkling fairy lights. A string quartet played softly in the corner, and waiters in crisp white uniforms glided through the room carrying trays of champagne and miniature, intricate appetizers that I didn't recognize. The moment we stepped through the glass doors, the low murmur of conversation instantly ceased. Dozens of pairs of eyes turned to look at us. Felt like walking into a lion's den wearing a steak. "Showtime," Elara whispered near my ear. She reached down and took my hand, intertwining our fingers. I immediately leaned into her side, letting my thumb slowly trace the back of her hand. It was an instinctual movement, one that had me questioning when exactly I had become so comfortable touching her. We spent the next hour navigating a minefield of aggressively wealthy relatives. Elara was a masterclass in deflection and polite arrogance. She introduced me to uncles who asked about my investment portfolio. I smoothly lied and said I was passionate about investing in independent literary presses, and cousins who gave me thinly veiled up-and-down looks of judgment. Through it all, Elara never let go of me. If she wasn't holding my hand, her hand was resting on the small of my back. When we sat down for the 6-course dinner, her chair was pulled so close to mine that our thighs were pressed together under the heavy linen tablecloth. Constant, searing heat of her body against mine was making it incredibly difficult to focus on the conversation. "So, Maya," a sharp voice cut through the polite dinner chatter. It was Victoria, the bride. She looked exactly like Elara and Eleanor, but with an added layer of high-strung, bridal-induced panic. "Mother tells me you're an English major." "How quaint. What exactly does one do with that?" "Teach." Table fell silent. It wasn't a genuine question, it was a test. I felt Elara tense beside me, her jaw clenching. She opened her mouth to intervene, but I squeezed her thigh under the table, signaling her to let me handle it. "Actually, Victoria," I said, putting my silver fork down and offering her a bright, sickeningly sweet smile. "I'm interning at a publishing house in the city next semester. While some people find comfort in numbers and corporate law, I find that shaping narratives and deciding which stories the world gets to read holds its own kind of significant power. Much like planning a flawless wedding." Victoria blinked, momentarily stunned by the velvet-wrapped counterattack. Several people down the table let out low murmurs of approval. Elara picked up her crystal wine glass, taking a slow sip to hide the incredibly smug, proud smirk playing on her lips. "Well said," Elara Vance murmured from the head of the table, her dark eyes evaluating me with a newfound sliver of respect. As dessert was cleared away, the string quartet shifted from classical background music to a slow, sweeping waltz. A few older couples made their way to the small open space in the center of the solarium. "Dance with me," Elara said suddenly. It wasn't a request. Before I could protest that I had 2 left feet, she stood up, taking my hand and leading me to the floor. The moment we were in the center of the room, she pulled me flush against her. One hand went to my waist, resting securely against the bare skin exposed by the low back of my dress, while her other hand engulfed mine. "You didn't warn me there was going to be dancing," I whispered frantically, trying to follow her smooth, effortless steps without stepping on her expensive Italian shoes. "You handle my sister perfectly." "Consider this a reward," Elara replied smoothly. She looked down at me, the fairy lights reflecting in her dark eyes like scattered constellations. "Besides, my mother is watching us from 2 o'clock. Put your arms around my neck." I swallowed hard, slowly sliding my free arm up to drape over her shoulder, my fingers brushing the soft velvet of her jacket collar. She pulled me closer, so close that there was absolutely no space left between us. I could feel the steady, rhythmic beat of her heart against my chest. The scent of sandalwood and champagne was intoxicating. For a few minutes, the entire room faded away. There was no judgmental mother, no panicked bride, no fake dating contract. There was just the sweeping music, the dim lighting, and the overwhelming, terrifying realization that being held by Elara Vance felt better than being held by anyone else I had ever known. Better than Chloe. Better than anyone. "You're shaking," Elara murmured, her breath grazing my temple. "I'm just cold," I lied softly, burying my face slightly into the crook of her neck to hide the blush I knew was violently coloring my cheeks. "Liar," she whispered back, her hand tightening on my waist, her thumb lightly tracing my bare spine in a way that sent sparks flying behind my closed eyelids. We stayed on the dance floor for 2 more songs before Elara finally, mercifully, led us away, claiming jet lag. We made our goodnights, playing the perfect devoted couple right up until the heavy oak door of our guest suite clicked shut behind us. The silence of the room was sudden and deafening. The adrenaline of the performance instantly drained away, leaving behind the heavy, unavoidable reality of the single king-sized bed dominating the center of the room. Elara stepped away from me, shrugging off her velvet jacket and tossing it onto a chair. She ran a hand through her hair, ruining the perfect waves. "You take the bathroom first." "I need to make a phone call." I practically fled into the bathroom, stripping off the green dress and changing into my oversized, faded college t-shirt and flannel pajama pants. I brushed my teeth, staring at my flushed reflection. "Get a grip, Maya," I told myself sternly. "It's a job. It's a role. She is doing this to survive her family, not because she wants you." When I walked back into the bedroom, Elara was already in bed. She was wearing a simple black silk tank top, her bare arms resting above the covers. The bedside lamp cast a warm, golden glow over her features. She was reading a book, wearing a pair of wire-rimmed reading glasses that made her look impossibly sophisticated and undeniably attractive. I stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed. "Which side do you prefer?" Elara looked up over the rim of her glasses. "I don't care, Maya. Just get in. The bed is large enough that we don't have to acknowledge each other's existence if we don't want to." Her tone was back to the cold, distant Elara from the coffee shop. The shift gave me a weird sense of whiplash, but it also made it easier to climb into the massive bed. I stayed strictly on the very edge of the mattress, pulling the thick duvet up to my chin. There were at least 3 feet of empty space between us. "Turn the light off when you're done, please," I said quietly, turning my back to her. "Good night, Maya," Elara replied softly a few minutes later. A click sounded, and the room was plunged into absolute darkness. I closed my eyes, exhausted to my bones but completely unable to sleep. The sounds of the ocean crashing outside the window did nothing to calm my racing mind. I lay perfectly still for what felt like hours, hyper-aware of the shifting of the mattress whenever Elara took a breath or turned a page. Sometime around 2 a.m., the temperature in the room plummeted. Coastal wind rattled the massive windows. I shivered, curling into a tight ball to preserve my body heat, pulling the duvet tighter around my shoulders. Suddenly, I felt the mattress dip behind me. Before I could process what was happening, a warm, heavy arm draped over my waist. I gasped quietly as I was pulled backward, my back hitting a solid, incredibly warm chest. Elara's arm tightened, anchoring me firmly against her. Her legs tangled casually with mine, and I felt her face press softly into the space between my shoulder blades. She was fast asleep, her breathing slow and even. It was an unconscious, instinctual movement seeking warmth in the cold room. I should have pushed her away. I should have woken her up and reminded her of the contract. But I didn't. I lay frozen in the dark, entirely enveloped by her warmth and the scent of sandalwood, my heart hammering a dangerous, entirely real rhythm against my ribs as I slowly, carefully let my hand rest over hers. End of Part 4. Part 5. Morning came gradually, painted in soft strokes of pale blue and gold that filtered through the sheer curtains of the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. I didn't wake up all at once. I drifted into consciousness slowly, anchored by an oppressive yet incredibly comforting weight pressing against my back. Took my sleep-addled brain a full minute to process the sensory information. The rhythmic rise and fall of a chest against my spine. The heavy, warm arm draped securely over my waist, holding me tightly in place. The faint, intoxicating scent of sandalwood and something inherently, uniquely Elara buried in the fabric of my t-shirt. My eyes flew open. I was completely tangled in her. During the night, the vast expanse of the king-sized bed had been entirely abandoned. We were occupying a single sliver of the mattress, my back pressed flush against her front. Her face was tucked into the crook of my neck, her warm breath sending a cascade of shivers down my collarbone with every exhale. Panic and a terrifying surge of pure electricity warred in my chest. I needed to move. I needed to gently extract myself before she woke up and realized we had broken the unspoken rule of the bed. But as I shifted slightly, trying to slide my leg out from under hers, her arm instantly tightened around me. A low, raspy groan vibrated against my neck. "Stop moving," Elara murmured, her voice thick with sleep, completely devoid of its usual sharp edge. "It's freezing." "Elara," I whispered, my voice incredibly breathy and betraying entirely too much panic. "It's morning." Cadence of her breathing changed. I could practically feel the exact moment her brain kicked into gear, processing our position. The heavy arm around my waist went completely rigid. Slowly, agonizingly, she pulled back, untangling her legs from mine and shifting to the opposite side of the mattress. The sudden loss of her body heat felt like being plunged into ice water. I rolled over, clutching the duvet to my chest. Elara was sitting up, her back leaning against the ornate headboard, running a hand through her wildly messy dark hair. In the morning light, without her designer clothes and her armor of indifference, she looked terrifyingly soft. "I apologize," she said stiffly, refusing to meet my eyes. She stared fixedly at the ocean outside the window. I must have been cold in the middle of the night. It was an unconscious reflex. "It means nothing." "Of course," I agreed immediately, my heart still hammering against my ribs. "Just survival instincts." Completely transactional body heat. Elara finally looked at me, a brief, unreadable expression flashing across her face before the familiar, calculating mask slid back into place. "Exactly. Now get dressed. We have a family brunch in an hour, and my Aunt Beatrice has arrived. If you thought my mother was an interrogation, Beatrice is a firing squad." An hour later, I was seated on a breathtaking stone terrace overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, wearing a cream-colored sundress that Elara had wordlessly pulled from my garment bag, declaring it appropriate for daytime warfare. Terrace was filled with the extended Vance family. The clinking of crystal mimosas and the low hum of privileged complaints provided the soundtrack to my mounting anxiety. Elara sat beside me, her posture impeccably straight, sipping black coffee. She had silently claimed my left hand under the table the moment we sat down, her thumb absent-mindedly stroking my knuckles. It was for show, I knew that, but my body stubbornly reacted to the touch as if it were entirely genuine. "So, Maya," a voice rasped from across the table. I looked up. Aunt Beatrice was a formidable woman in her late 70s, wrapped in cashmere and dripping with emeralds that probably cost more than my college tuition. She had eyes like a hawk and a mouth set in a permanent line of disapproval. "Eleanor tells me you and our Elara met in an art history seminar," Beatrice drawled, swirling her mimosa. "How perfectly bohemian. Tell me, what period is Elara's favorite? She's always been so dreadfully secretive about her passions." Table grew quiet. I felt Elara's hand tense around mine. This wasn't on the flashcards. We hadn't discussed her favorite art period. I had a split second to make a choice, admit I didn't know, which would instantly flag me as a fake, or lie and hope I was a good enough actress to sell it. I took a slow breath, leaning slightly into Elara's shoulder. I looked directly at Aunt Beatrice, channeling every ounce of confidence I had faked the night before. "She won't tell you because she doesn't think anyone else will understand it," I said softly, but clearly enough for the table to hear. "Most people look at Elara and see someone modern, sharp, and structured. They guess she prefers contemporary or minimalist art." I paused, letting my gaze drift to Elara's profile. She was staring at me, her dark eyes wide with genuine surprise. "But that's not true," I continued, turning back to Beatrice. "Her favorite is the Romanticism period, specifically the dark, moody landscapes of the late 18th century. Stormy seas, ancient ruins, skies that look like they're burning. She loves it because it's chaotic and deeply emotional, entirely untamed by the rules of society." I gently squeezed Elara's hand under the table. "She likes the things that look dangerous on the surface, but are actually just profoundly misunderstood." Absolute silence descended upon the terrace. You could have heard a pin drop on the stone floor. Beatrice stared at me, her jaw slightly slack. Eleanor was watching Elara, searching her face for confirmation. But I was only focused on Elara. She was looking at me as if I had just reached into her chest and read her soul. The mask of indifference was entirely shattered. For a fleeting second, the vulnerability in her eyes was so raw, so beautifully devastating that it stole the breath right out of my lungs. "Well," Beatrice finally said, clearing her throat and sitting back in her chair. "I suppose that is quite an insightful observation. Pass the marmalade, would you, Victoria?" Conversation slowly resumed, the tension breaking like a fever. Elara leaned in, her lips brushing just below my ear. The action was intimate, ostensibly for the benefit of the family, but her voice was shaking. "How did you know that?" she whispered. "I didn't," I whispered back, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. "I guessed." "Was I wrong?" Elara pulled back just enough to look me in the eye. "No," she breathed. "You were exactly right." By 2 o'clock, the wedding preparations had reached a fever pitch, and the house was a chaotic nightmare of florists, caterers, and a screaming bride. Elara abruptly grabbed my hand and pulled me out through the back French doors, dragging me down the sweeping lawn toward the private beach. "We need a tactical retreat," she announced, not letting go of my hand until we reached the soft, pale sand. The wind off the Atlantic was sharp and salty, whipping Elara's dark hair around her face. She kicked off her expensive loafers and rolled up the cuffs of her slacks, walking directly to the shoreline where the icy water lapped at the sand. I followed suit, carrying my sandals. We walked in silence for a long time, the roar of the ocean drowning out the madness of the estate behind us. It was the first time since we arrived that nobody was watching us. We didn't have to hold hands. We didn't have to pretend. Yet the invisible tether between us felt stronger than ever. "You're a brilliant liar, Maya," Elara finally said, staring out at the gray horizon. I wasn't lying back there on the terrace, I replied quietly, watching the wind catch the hem of my dress. I was just describing what I see when I look at you. Elara stopped walking. She turned to face me, the ocean wind tossing her hair. Without the oppressive weight of her family's gaze, she looked younger, exhausted, and incredibly beautiful. Why do you let them treat you like that? I asked, the question slipping out before I could censor it. You're brilliant, you're capable, but you let them treat you like you're some sort of massive disappointment just because you don't fit into their perfect corporate mold. Elara let out a bitter, self-deprecating laugh. She looked down at the sand, her hands shoved deep into her pockets. You don't understand the Vance family dynamic. Excellence isn't a goal, it's the baseline. My sister is marrying a hedge fund manager. My brother is at Oxford. I'm an art major who refuses to use the family connections to secure a gallery job. To them, I am a liability. I am the wild card that threatens the meticulously crafted image. So you push them away before they can push you, I observed softly, stepping a fraction closer to her. You build this impenetrable ice queen persona so nobody can see that their judgment actually hurts. Elara's head snapped up. Her dark eyes flashed, a defensive wall instantly slamming down. Don't psychoanalyze me, Maya. You don't know me. You've known me for exactly 5 days. I know that you hold my hand like you're terrified I'm going to let go, I countered, my voice steady despite the adrenaline roaring in my ears. I took another step closer, entirely invading her personal space. The scent of sandalwood mixed with the salty sea air. I know that you practically attacked my ex with your eyes just to make me feel better. And I know that you hate being alone in that massive bed just as much as I do. Elara stared at me, her chest heaving slightly. The defensive anger in her eyes was slowly fracturing, replaced by a terrified, magnetic pull. She didn't step back. She held her ground, looking down at me with an intensity that made the ground beneath my feet feel unstable. You are dangerously observant, she whispered, her voice rough, dropping an octave. You told me to play a role, I whispered back, my eyes dropping to her lips involuntarily. I'm just doing my job. You are doing a terrible job of pretending, Maya. Elara reached out. Slowly, deliberately, completely dropping the pretense of the fake relationship. There was no audience. There was no mother watching from a balcony. This was just us. Her cool fingers brushed the side of my neck, sliding up into my hair, her thumb resting on my cheekbone. Her touch was electric, searing straight through my skin and setting my blood on fire. My breath caught in my throat. I titled my head up, entirely mesmerized by the dark depths of her eyes. The distance between us evaporated. I could feel her breath against my lips. I closed my eyes, leaning in, terrified and exhilarated, ready to cross the line that would ruin the contract forever. Elara! Maya! The shrill, panicked voice of a wedding planner echoed down the beach through a megaphone. Elara flinched, pulling back as if she had been burned. The moment shattered into a million irreparable pieces. I stumbled back a step, gasping for air as if I had been holding it for an hour. The photographer is looking for you for the family portraits. The ceremony is in 2 hours. We need you in the house now. Elara turned her face away from me, staring out at the ocean. Her chest was rising and falling rapidly. She ran a shaking hand through her hair, taking a deep, shuddering breath before the familiar cold mask was violently shoved back into place. We need to go, she said, her voice entirely devoid of the raw emotion that had been there a second ago. She didn't look at me. She just turned and started walking quickly back toward the house. I stood frozen on the sand, the cold ocean water washing over my bare feet. My lips were tingling, my heart was breaking, and the terrifying reality crashed over me like a tidal wave. I wasn't faking it anymore. I had fallen entirely, helplessly in love with my fake girlfriend, and the real performance was only just beginning. End of Part 5. Part 6. The walk back to the estate felt like a march to the gallows. The space between Elara and me, which had been dangerously non-existent just minutes prior, had suddenly expanded into an unbridgeable chasm. She didn't look at me, didn't reach for my hand, and her jaw was set so tightly I was terrified it might shatter. The impenetrable Ice Queen was back, her walls built twice as high to compensate for the terrifying crack I had managed to create, and I was utterly, devastatingly heartbroken. The estate was a whirlwind of frantic energy. Hairdressers, makeup artists, and frantic wedding coordinators swarmed the hallways. I was ushered into a secondary guest room, separated from Elara, and manhandled into my dress for the ceremony. It was a deep wine-red silk gown that draped elegantly over my frame, chosen by Elara's stylist. My hair was pinned up in a loose, romantic style, and when I finally looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. I looked like I belonged in this world of old money and effortless glamour. But inside, my chest felt hollowed out, echoing with the memory of Elara's breath against my lips and the crushing reality of her immediate retreat. "Maya, the photographer is waiting in the rose garden for the family portraits," a panic coordinator yelled from the doorway. I took a shaky breath, plastered on the fake, radiant smile I had been perfecting all weekend, and walked down the grand staircase. The rose garden was in full bloom, a riot of colors under the late afternoon sun. The entire Vance family was assembled, looking like a spread in a high-fashion magazine. And standing at the edge of the manicured lawn was Elara. She wore a bespoke charcoal-gray three-piece suit that fit her so flawlessly it should have been illegal. A silver pocket watch chain draped across her vest, and her dark hair was slicked back, giving her an impossibly sharp, aristocratic edge. When she heard my heels clicking on the stone path, she turned. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. Her dark eyes widened, taking in the red silk, the pinned-up hair, the delicate silver necklace resting against my collarbone. She swallowed hard, her Adam's apple bobbing slightly. But before I could even register the reaction, her expression smoothed over into complete, terrifying blankness. "You're late," she said, her voice entirely devoid of emotion. "I was being aggressively contoured by a woman named Helga," I replied, my voice tight. "I didn't have much of a choice." "Elara! Maya! Over here, please," the photographer called out, waving frantically. "We need the couple's shots before the lighting changes." We walked over to the designated spot beneath a trellis dripping with white roses. The photographer, a hyperactive man with a thick French accent, started giving rapid-fire directions. "Okay, beautiful, beautiful. Now closer. Elara, put your arm around her waist. Maya, rest your hand on her chest. Look at each other. Oh, look in love." It was pure, unadulterated torture. Elara's hand settled on my waist. Her touch, which had felt like liquid fire on the beach, now felt rigid and mechanical. I placed my hand flat against the crisp fabric of her vest. I could feel her heartbeat beneath my palm. It was fast, erratic, entirely betraying her calm exterior. I looked up into her eyes, trying to find a trace of the girl who had almost kissed me on the sand. But her eyes were dark, guarded, and completely walled off. She was looking at me, but she wasn't seeing me. She was looking at a prop, a shield, an employee fulfilling a contract. "Smile, Maya," she murmured through gritted teeth, her lips barely moving. "You look like you're attending a funeral." "Maybe I am," I whispered back, a sudden flare of defensive anger sparking in my chest. "Maybe I'm mourning the fact that you're a coward." Elara's eyes flashed with sudden, brilliant fury. Her grip on my waist tightened painfully. The photographer's flash went off, capturing the intense electric tension between us and undoubtedly mistaking it for passion. "Don't push me right now," Elara warned softly, stepping back the absolute second the photographer gave the all-clear. She dropped her hand from my waist as if my silk dress had burned her. "Just do your job." The words felt like a physical slap. Do your job. That was all this was to her. I nodded numbly, biting the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted copper, determined not to let a single tear fall and ruin Helga's masterpiece. The ceremony was a blur of excruciating perfection. Hundreds of guests sat on white wooden chairs facing the ocean. A string quartet played. Victoria, the bride, looked genuinely happy, and the groom looked terrified. I sat in the second row, directly beside Elara. As the couple exchanged their vows, speaking about trust, vulnerability, and choosing each other every single day, I felt a suffocating weight pressed down on my chest. I wanted that. I wanted the terrifying vulnerability of giving your heart to someone and trusting them not to break it. And sitting next to the girl who had locked her heart in an impenetrable vault, I realized I was never going to get it. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the crowd erupted into applause. Under the cover of the noise, Elara reached out and took my hand. It was the protocol. Rule number 1: public displays of affection are mandatory. But her fingers were freezing cold, and she didn't intertwine them with mine. She just held my hand limply, a physical representation of the massive distance between us. The reception was held in an enormous glass-paneled tent erected on the back lawn, lit by hundreds of crystal chandeliers. It was opulent, loud, and suffocating. Champagne flowed like water, and the Vance family worked the room with the practiced ease of politicians. I spent the first 2 hours playing the perfect, devoted girlfriend. I laughed at the uncle's terrible jokes, I complimented the aunts on their jewelry, and I stood by Elara's side, letting her keep her hand on the small of my back. But the silence between us was deafening. We were putting on a masterclass in physical proximity and emotional abandonment. Around 10 o'clock, the dancing began in earnest. Elara had been cornered by a group of her father's business associates, dissecting corporate mergers. I used the distraction to slip away, desperately needing to breathe air that didn't smell like expensive perfume and lies. I found a quiet corner on a stone balcony attached to the side of the tent, overlooking the darkened ocean. I leaned against the cold stone balustrade, wrapping my arms around myself, finally letting the exhaustion and heartbreak wash over me. I had one more night. One more night of sleeping in that massive bed, one more morning of family brunch, and then I could go back to my dorm room and try to forget the taste of the sea salt on her skin. Hiding from the festivities, Maya? I jumped, spinning around. Elara Vance, the terrifying matriarch herself, was stepping onto the balcony. She held a crystal flute of champagne, her silver hair catching the light from the tent. "Just getting some fresh air, Mrs. Vance," I said quickly, straightening my posture and immediately going on the defensive. I braced myself for another thinly veiled insult about my background or my major. Eleanor walked slowly to the balustrade, standing a few feet away from me. She looked out at the ocean for a long moment in silence. "You know," she began, her voice shockingly quiet, stripped of its usual commanding boom. "When Elara first told me she was bringing a girlfriend to this wedding, I assumed she had hired an actress. Or found some desperate art student willing to play a part in exchange for tuition money." My heart stopped completely. The blood drained from my face. My hands gripped the stone edge so tightly my knuckles turned white. "She knows." "I assumed," Eleanor continued, turning her sharp dark eyes toward me, "that it was just another one of her rebellious stunts to keep me from setting her up with the Henderson boy. She has always been fiercely opposed to letting anyone, especially me, dictate her life." I couldn't speak. My mouth was entirely dry. The gig was up. We had failed. But then, Eleanor took a slow sip of her champagne, her gaze piercing right through my soul. "I saw the way she looked at you on the terrace this morning when you defended her to Beatrice. And I saw the way she looked at you during the vows today. My daughter is a master of deception, Maya. She can lie to a boardroom full of executives without blinking. But she cannot control her eyes when she looks at you." I stared at her, entirely paralyzed. I don't. "Do not insult my intelligence by denying it," Eleanor cut me off gently but firmly. "I am not a fool. I know the relationship is entirely new, and I know she is terrified of it. Elara has always pushed people away because she believes her intellect and her independence are the only things that keep her safe. She views love as a vulnerability, a weakness." Eleanor took a step closer to me. The harsh lines of her face softened, revealing a glimpse of a mother who, underneath the armor of wealth and expectation, actually knew her child. "You are the first person I have ever seen challenge her without backing down. You are the first person who seems to understand the chaos she hides behind that tailored suit," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a low, serious register. "Do not let her push you away, Maya. Because if you let her build that wall back up, she may never let anyone else in." With that devastating, world-altering revelation, Eleanor turned and walked gracefully back into the glowing tent, leaving me completely alone in the dark. My mind was spinning out of control. She saw the way she looked at you. Contract. The job. The fake relationship. None of it made sense anymore. If Elara Vance, the most perceptive, critical woman on the planet, saw real feelings in Elara's eyes, then I wasn't crazy. The near kiss on the beach wasn't just a lapse in judgment. It was real. I turned back to the tent, my heart pounding a violent, urgent rhythm. I needed to find her. I pushed my way through the crowded dance floor, scanning the room for the charcoal gray suit. I finally spotted her standing near the massive ice sculpture at the far end of the tent. She was alone, swirling a glass of amber liquid, staring blankly at the dancing crowd. She looked completely detached, completely untouchable. But I knew better now. I marched straight toward her, my red silk dress catching the attention of several guests, but I didn't care. I stopped directly in front of her, entirely invading her personal space. Elara blinked in surprise, taking a step back. "Maya." "We need to talk," I said, my voice shaking with a terrifying mix of adrenaline and desperate hope. "Right now." "Alone." Elara's eyes darted around the room, instantly hyper-aware of the people watching us. The Ice Queen mask slammed firmly into place. "Keep your voice down. People are staring. If you're having a panic attack, we can go to the suite, but do not make a scene." "I am making a scene," I interrupted, taking another step forward, forcing her to look down at me. "I don't care about the contract. I don't care about the flashcards. I don't care about your mother watching us from the dessert table." Elara's jaw clenched. "Maya, stop. You're emotional, you've had champagne, you're not thinking clearly. Let's just get through the next 12 hours. Don't do that," I practically yelled, the frustration boiling over. A few heads turned in our direction, but I was entirely beyond caring. "Don't patronize me and don't push me away. You kissed me, Elara. Or you almost did. And you didn't do it for the audience. There was nobody watching us on that beach." The amber liquid in Elara's glass sloshed violently as her hand trembled. Her eyes widened, a flash of pure, unadulterated panic breaking through her carefully constructed facade. "It was a mistake," she hissed, her voice low and frantic. "It was a lapse in judgment. It meant nothing." "You're a liar," I said, my voice dropping to an intense, undeniable whisper. I reached out, pressing my palm flat against her chest, right over her racing heart. She gasped slightly at the contact, but didn't pull away. "Your mother just told me she sees the way you look at me. She thinks it's real. And I think you know it's real, too. But you're so terrified of actually feeling something that you'd rather ruin this than admit it." Elara stared down at me, her chest heaving under my hand. The music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, all of it faded into absolute silence. It was just us, standing on the precipice of a terrifying reality, entirely stripped of our defenses. For an agonizingly long second, I thought she was going to lean in. I thought she was going to shatter the glass wall she had built around herself and finally actually kiss me. But then she looked away. She carefully, deliberately reached up and removed my hand from her chest. Her fingers were freezing. "You're fired, Maya," she whispered, her voice completely devoid of emotion, her eyes refusing to meet mine. "The contract is terminated. We're done playing pretend." Before I could even process the words, she turned on her heel and walked out of the tent, disappearing into the dark of the estate grounds, taking all the air in my lungs with her. End of Part 6. Part 7. The words, "You're fired," echoed in my ears, cutting through the thumping bass of the wedding reception music like a physical blade. I stood frozen by the ice sculpture, the ambient glow of the chandeliers blurring as my eyes filled with unshed tears. She was gone. She had slipped out of the tent and vanished into the darkness, taking my heart, my pride, and the last shred of my dignity with her. I didn't stay to watch the cake cutting. I didn't stay to say goodbye to Eleanor, who had seen right through the lie and somehow tragically believed in the truth more than Elara did. I turned on my heel, ignoring the questioning glances of a few nearby guests, and practically ran back to the main house. The guest suite, which had felt like a thrilling, dangerous sanctuary just that morning, now felt like a mausoleum. The massive king-sized bed mocked me, the sheets still slightly rumpled on the side where I had woken up pressed against her. My hands were shaking violently as I reached around to the back of the wine-red silk dress. The zipper was delicate, and my fingers were clumsy with panic and heartbreak. I couldn't reach it properly. I pulled, I twisted, and a humiliating sob tore from my throat as I remembered how easily, how intimately Elara had zipped up the green dress just the night before. I pulled harder, desperate to get the expensive fabric off my skin, and with a sickening rip, the silk tore. I didn't care. I stepped out of the ruined dress, leaving it in a crumpled pool of red on the expensive carpet, and pulled on my faded jeans and the oversized college t-shirt that still smelled faintly of her sandalwood perfume. I shoved my few belongings into my battered duffel bag, refusing to look in the gilded mirror. I ordered a rideshare on my phone, paying an exorbitant, ridiculous fee to get a driver to come out to the Hamptons at midnight. I slipped out the back staircase, avoiding the remaining staff, and walked down the long, gravel driveway in the dark. The 2-hour drive to the nearest open train station was agonizing. The subsequent train ride back to the city and then the connecting bus to campus was a blur of exhaustion and numb, hollow pain. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky in cruel, cheerful shades of pink and orange, when I finally unlocked the door to my dorm room. My roommate was gone for the weekend. The room was silent, cramped, and exactly how I had left it. It was Sunday morning. The fake relationship was officially over, right on schedule. I dropped my bag on the floor, crawled into my narrow twin bed, pulled the covers over my head, and finally completely broke down. Monday morning brought a torrential downpour, entirely fitting for my mood. I skipped my morning classes, unable to summon the energy to care about Renaissance architecture when the very thought of art history made my chest physically ache. By noon, the sheer need for caffeine forced me out of my room. I walked into the campus coffee shop, my hood pulled up, praying to avoid anyone I knew. Naturally, the universe had other plans. "Maya? Oh my God, you look awful." I froze, closing my eyes for a brief second to summon whatever strength I had left. I turned around to face the pastry counter. Standing there, looking perfectly polished in her expensive athletic wear, was Chloe. Sarah, the volleyball captain, was nowhere in sight. "Hi, Chloe," I said flatly, keeping my distance. Chloe stepped closer, her eyes scanning my pale face, the dark circles under my eyes, and my damp hair. A look of patronizing sympathy washed over her features, though her eyes glinted with undeniable satisfaction. "I didn't see you or Elara around this weekend. Actually, I haven't seen Elara on campus today either. Did something happen?" "We went out of town," I said shortly, turning back to the barista to order my black coffee. "I didn't even want milk or sugar today. I just wanted the bitterness." "Right," Chloe drawled, leaning against the counter. "Look, Maya. I know you were trying to make a point by showing up with Elara Vance of all people. And I get it, she's intimidating. And rich. But I also know she goes through people like tissues. I warned you she was out of your league." My blood ran cold. The sheer audacity of her standing there, pretending to care while actively gloating over my visible heartbreak, ignited a spark of pure, unadulterated fury deep in my chest. Elara might have broken my heart, but she had also spent an entire weekend demanding I take up space, demanding I stand my ground against billionaires and judgmental matriarchs. She had taught me how to wear armor. I turned fully to face Chloe, my posture straightening. I didn't shrink away. I looked her dead in the eye. She wasn't out of my league, Chloe, I said, my voice eerily calm and steady, carrying clearly over the hiss of the espresso machine. She was just in a completely different universe. A universe where people actually protect the people they are with instead of dropping them the second they get bored. Chloe's fake, sympathetic smile vanished instantly. Her mouth opened in shock. Elara and I are done, I stated clearly, deciding to take control of the narrative before the campus rumor mill did. But you want to know the best part? Even fake dating her for a weekend was more genuine than the last 6 months of our relationship. 'Cause she actually saw me. She challenged me. You just wanted me to sit quietly on the sidelines while you figured out how to upgrade. Chloe stammered, taking a step back, visibly rattled by the confrontation. Don't, I cut her off, grabbing my paper cup from the counter. We're not friends, Chloe. We never will be. Enjoy the volleyball team. I walked out of the coffee shop, the heavy wooden door swinging shut behind me. The rain was still pouring, but as I stepped out into the cold air, my chest felt marginally lighter. The crippling weight of the breakup with Chloe was entirely gone, replaced by a fierce, protective pride. I had survived Elara Vance. I could survive an immature college ex. But surviving the ghost of Elara Vance was proving to be impossible. By Wednesday evening, the storm hadn't let up. Campus was a miserable gray puddle. I was sitting cross-legged on my dorm room floor, surrounded by textbooks I wasn't reading, staring blankly at the wall. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt her thumb brushing my cheekbone on the beach. Every time I tried to sleep, I felt the phantom weight of her arm pulling me against her chest in the dark. A sharp, sudden knock on my dorm room door made me jump. I frowned, looking at the clock. It was nearly 9 p.m. My roommate had texted saying she was studying late at the library. Assuming it was the RA doing rounds, I pushed myself off the floor, wiping a stray tear from my cheek, and unlocked the door. I pulled the door open. My heart stopped beating. The breath was violently sucked out of my lungs. Standing in the dimly lit hallway, dripping wet, was Elara. She wasn't wearing a bespoke suit or a velvet jacket. She was wearing faded jeans and a black leather jacket that was soaked through, sticking to her shoulders. Her dark wavy hair was plastered to her forehead and neck, water dripping steadily onto the linoleum floor of the hallway. She wasn't wearing any armor. She looked entirely undone. We stared at each other in complete silence for 5 agonizing seconds. The air in the hallway crackled with a suffocating electric tension. You left, Elara finally spoke, her voice rough, barely above a whisper. It wasn't an accusation, it sounded like a confession of absolute defeat. You fired me, I fired back instinctively, my hands gripping the edge of the door to keep myself standing. You terminated the contract. I was just doing what I was told. Elara flinched as if I had struck her. She looked down at her wet boots, her jaw clenching tight. I went back to the suite. After the reception, the dress was on the floor. Your bags were gone. I didn't know you had left until I saw the empty bed. What did you expect, Elara? I demanded, the anger and the heartbreak rising to the surface, making my voice tremble. Did you expect me to stay and sleep on the floor? Did you expect me to sit through Sunday brunch and pretend my heart wasn't ripped to shreds while you treated me like a disposable employee? I expected you to fight back. Elara suddenly yelled, her head snapping up, her dark eyes blazing with a desperate, frantic energy. You fought my mother. You fought my aunt. You fought me the entire weekend. I expected you to tell me I was being an idiot and refused to leave. I did tell you. I yelled back, tears finally spilling over my eyelashes, hot and angry. I stood in that tent in front of everyone and I told you it was real. And you looked me in the eye and pushed me away. I am not going to beg you to love me, Elara. I have too much respect for myself to do that. The fight drained out of Elara in an instant. Her shoulders slumped. The impenetrable Ice Queen was gone, leaving behind a terrified, drowning girl standing in a puddle in a college dormitory hallway. "I'm not asking you to beg," she whispered, her voice cracking, a sound so broken it physically hurt my chest to hear. "I'm asking if I can come inside." I stared at her, my mind screaming at me to close the door, to protect myself, to run. But my heart, traitorous and entirely devoted to her, overrode every logical thought. I took a step back, pulling the door wider. Elara stepped into the small, cramped dorm room. It was the exact opposite of the Vance estate, messy, cheap, and utterly ordinary. But as the heavy wooden door clicked shut behind her, sealing us inside, the rest of the world ceased to exist. She didn't move further into the room. She stood by the door, water dripping from her leather jacket onto my cheap rug. She looked at me, her dark eyes completely stripped of their usual calculation. For the first time since I met her, Elara Vance looked terrified. "My mother cornered me on Sunday morning," Elara said softly, her voice shaking. "She demanded to know where you were. I told her the contract had expired. I told her the truth about the arrangement." I closed my eyes, feeling a fresh wave of humiliation. "So she knows it was a lie." "No," Elara corrected instantly, taking a single step closer to me. "She laughed at me. She looked at me with absolute pity and told me I was the biggest fool in the Vance family history. She told me that I had finally found someone brave enough to stand in the fire with me, and I had thrown her away because I was scared of getting burned." I opened my eyes. Elara was looking at me with such raw, unadulterated vulnerability that it made my knees weak. "I have spent my entire life building walls, Maya," Elara confessed, the words pouring out of her like a dam had broken. "I built them so high and so thick that I thought nobody would ever be able to climb them. I thought I was safe. And then you walked into the coffee shop and you didn't even try to climb the wall. You just walked right through it. You saw me. You saw the romanticism, the chaos, the fear. You saw all of it and you didn't run away." She took another step, closing the distance between us until she was standing right in front of me. I could feel the cold radiating off her wet clothes, mixed with the intoxicating scent of rain and sandalwood. "When you touched my chest in the tent, when you looked at me and told me it was real," Elara whispered, a single tear mixing with the rainwater on her cheek, I panicked. "Because if I let you in and then you realized how truly broken I am underneath the tailored suits and the arrogance, if you decided to leave me, I knew I wouldn't survive it. So I broke it first. To survive." She reached out, her hand trembling violently, stopping inches from my face. She didn't touch me. She was waiting for permission. She was giving me the power. "I am terrified, Maya," Elara breathed, her dark eyes locked onto mine, pleading, vulnerable and completely laid bare. "I am absolutely terrified. But the last 3 days without you have been worse than anything my family could ever do to me. I don't want to fake it anymore. I don't want a contract. I just want you." My heart hammered against my ribs, a deafening drumbeat of hope and terror. I looked at the girl who had terrified me, challenged me, and ultimately broken down every defense I possessed. I looked at her trembling hand suspended in the air between us. I took a slow breath, my own hand shaking, and I reached up. I didn't push her hand away. I caught her cold, trembling fingers in mine, intertwined them, and finally, firmly pulled her across the remaining distance. End of Part 7. Part 8. The moment I pulled her across the threshold, the remaining inches between us vanished. There was no audience. There was no judgmental mother watching from a balcony, no resentful ex-girlfriend sitting on a stone bench, no photographer demanding we look like we were in love. There was just the drumming of the rain against my thin dorm room window and the overwhelming, undeniable truth of us. Elara's hands, freezing cold and trembling, immediately found my face. Her thumbs brushed my cheekbones, tilting my head up, and then she finally, desperately, closed the distance. Kiss was nothing like the calculated, poised affection she had displayed all weekend. It was entirely chaotic, tasting of rainwater, tears, and absolute relief. It was a collision of two people who had been holding their breath for days, finally remembering how to fill their lungs. Her cold leather jacket pressed against my t-shirt, soaking the fabric, but I couldn't feel the chill. All I could feel was the searing heat of her mouth against mine, the frantic grip of her fingers in my hair, and the way her entire body seemed to melt against me, surrendering the last of her heavy, suffocating armor. I wrapped my arms tightly around her waist, pulling her flush against my chest, kissing her back with every ounce of the love and frustration that had been building inside me since the beach. A soft, breathless sound escaped her throat, a sound so unguarded and real it made my heart ache. When we finally broke apart, we were both gasping for air. Elara rested her forehead against mine, her eyes closed, her chest heaving. Her hands remained tangled in my hair, as if she was terrified that if she let go, I would disappear. "I'm sorry," she whispered into the small space between us, her voice ragged. "I am so incredibly sorry, Maya." "You're an idiot," I whispered back, my voice shaking with a watery laugh. I reached up, gently wiping a raindrop or maybe a tear from her cheek. "A brilliant, terrifying, absolute idiot." Elara let out a choked laugh, opening her dark eyes to look at me. The walls were completely gone. The impenetrable Ice Queen was entirely dismantled, leaving only the girl who loved stormy seas and was terrified of her own heart. "You're freezing," I noted, suddenly hyper-aware of the puddle forming around her boots on my cheap linoleum floor. "You need to get out of those wet clothes before you catch pneumonia, and I am not explaining to Elara Vance that I let her daughter freeze to death in a sophomore dormitory." A faint, genuine smile touched Elara's lips at the mention of her mother. She finally took a step back, letting her hands drop to her sides, suddenly looking incredibly out of place and unsure of herself in my messy room. I turned into action mode. I dug through my dresser, pulling out a faded pair of gray sweatpants and my softest, most oversized college hoodie. I grabbed a clean towel from my tiny closet and handed the pile to her. "The bathroom is down the hall, but my roommate is gone, so you can just change here," I said, turning my back to give her privacy. "I'll make some tea." I heard the heavy, wet thud of her leather jacket hitting the floor, followed by the rustle of clothing. I busied myself with my electric kettle, trying to steady my racing heart. This wasn't a play anymore. This was real life. Elara Vance was in my dorm room, putting on my cheap sweatpants. "I must look absolutely ridiculous," a dry voice murmured from behind me. I turned around, holding 2 steaming mugs of chamomile tea, and completely lost my train of thought. Elara was swimming in my clothes. The gray sweatpants were a little too short for her long legs, and the oversized hoodie swallowed her completely. She had used the towel to dry her dark hair, leaving it a chaotic, wavy mess around her shoulders. She didn't look like a billionaire heiress. She didn't look like a spy movie villain. She looked soft, incredibly domestic, and so devastatingly beautiful it made my chest physically ache. "You look..." I swallowed hard, walking over and handing her a mug. "You look perfect." She took the mug, her fingers brushing mine, sending a familiar jolt of electricity up my arm. We sat down on the floor, leaning back against the edge of my narrow twin bed. For a long time, we just sat in silence, listening to the rain and drinking our tea. The frantic, desperate energy had faded, replaced by a quiet, profound sense of peace. "So," I finally spoke, staring down at my mug. "No more contracts." "No more contracts," Elara agreed softly. She set her half-empty mug on the floor and turned to face me, pulling one knee to her chest. "No more flashcards. No more pretending for my family or your ex. I want to learn you, Maya. For real this time. I want to know the things that aren't on the flashcards." I looked at her, my heart swelling with a warmth that completely chased away the chill of the storm outside. "I think you already know the most important things." Elara reached out, her fingers gently tracing the line of my jaw, her touch feather-light and incredibly tender. "I know that you are brave. I know that you don't back down. And I know that I am entirely, helplessly in love with you." Hearing the words out loud, spoken with such quiet, absolute certainty, completely knocked the breath out of me. I leaned into her touch, my eyes fluttering shut for a moment. I love you too, Elara. Even when you're being an emotionally repressed nightmare. Elara let out a genuine, bright laugh that filled the small room, a sound I realized I wanted to spend the rest of my life trying to pull out of her. That night, we didn't share a massive, luxurious king-sized bed in a Hamptons estate. We squeezed into my narrow twin mattress. It was cramped, slightly uncomfortable, and absolutely perfect. Elara wrapped her arms around me, pulling my back flush against her chest, burying her face in my neck just like she had the night of the storm. But this time, she didn't apologize when we woke up. She just pulled me closer, kissing the sleep from my eyes, entirely unbothered by the morning light. 2 months later, the harsh New England winter had settled over the campus, covering the quad in a thick blanket of pristine white snow. The holiday break was approaching, and the student body was buzzing with the frantic energy of final exams. I walked out of the English literature building, pulling my thick wool scarf up over my nose to block the biting wind. I had just finished a brutal 3-hour exam on Victorian poetry, and my brain felt like it had been put through a blender. As I pushed through the heavy wooden doors and stepped out onto the snowy path, I stopped. Standing by the large oak tree, precisely where we had debuted our fake relationship months ago, was Elara. She was back in her element, wearing a breathtakingly tailored long black wool coat and dark leather gloves. The winter wind tossed her dark hair, and her sharp, aristocratic features drew the eyes of practically everyone walking past. But she wasn't looking at them. The moment the heavy doors closed behind me, her dark eyes found mine, and the rest of the world entirely ceased to exist. A slow, brilliant smile spread across her face, a smile that was reserved entirely exclusively for me. My exhaustion vanished instantly. I practically ran down the snowy steps, throwing myself into her arms. Elara caught me effortlessly, her arms wrapping tightly around my waist, lifting me an inch off the ground as she buried her face in my neck, uncaring of the snow or the audience. "How was the exam?" she murmured against my scarf, her warm breath a stark contrast to the freezing air. "Brutal," I mumbled, leaning back just enough to look at her. I am 70% sure I misidentified a Tennyson quote. I need copious amounts of caffeine and a nap. "Your wish is my command," Elara said smoothly, setting me back on my feet but refusing to let go of my waist. "I have my car waiting. We can go back to my apartment. I bought that terrible, overly sweet vanilla syrup you like for the coffee." "You hate the smell of vanilla," I teased, raising an eyebrow. "I hate the smell of vanilla on anyone but you," she corrected flawlessly, leaning down to press a soft, lingering kiss to my cold lips. Well, if it isn't the happy couple." The voice was grating, familiar, and entirely unwelcome. I broke the kiss and turned my head. Chloe was walking down the path, flanked by 2 of her friends. She looked slightly bundled up, her eyes darting between Elara and me with a mix of lingering bitterness and poorly concealed curiosity. "Still keeping up the charade, I see?" Chloe asked, crossing her arms over her chest. "It's been 2 months. Don't you think the bid is getting a little old?" I'm honestly surprised Elara hasn't gotten bored of the college dorm aesthetic yet. A few months ago, those words would have sent a spike of anxiety straight through my chest. I would have looked to Elara for a script, for permission to act, for a defense mechanism. Now, I just felt a profound sense of exhaustion at Chloe's relentless immaturity. I opened my mouth to tell her to get a life, but Elara beat me to it. Elara didn't tighten her grip protectively, nor did she put on the arrogant, terrifying persona she had used at that first party. She simply shifted her stance, dropping one hand to comfortably intertwine her fingers with mine. She looked at Chloe with the same detached, bored expression one might use when looking at a mildly annoying insect on a windshield. "Chloe, isn't it?" Elara asked, her voice dangerously quiet and impossibly smooth. Chloe stiffened, her fake confidence faltering. "You know my name. I have an excellent memory for minor annoyances," Elara replied evenly. She didn't raise her voice, but the sheer weight of her presence commanded the entire space. I'm going to make this very simple for you because I understand subtlety isn't your strong suit. Maya and I are not putting on a show for you. You are, quite frankly, entirely irrelevant to our lives. If you continue to approach us or speak to Maya with that tone, I will ensure that the remainder of your academic career is a very uncomfortable, isolating experience. Do we understand each other? The threat wasn't loud or aggressive. It was cold, precise, and absolute. It was Elara Vance's terrifying intellect mixed with Elara's fierce, unwavering protectiveness. Chloe swallowed hard, all the color draining from her face. She looked at her friends, who had entirely backed away, wanting no part of Elara's wrath. Whatever, Chloe muttered, backing away. You guys are crazy. She turned and practically jogged down the path, disappearing into the crowd of students. I looked up at Elara, trying to suppress a massive, triumphant grin. Was the supervillain threat really necessary? Elara looked down at me, the terrifying Ice Queen instantly melting away, replaced by a look of profound, devastating adoration. I am incredibly possessive of my time with you, darling. I don't like sharing it with people who don't appreciate your worth. She brought our intertwined hands up, pressing a warm kiss to my knuckles. I didn't ask her to hold me like that. I didn't have to ask her to pretend anymore. Careful script we had written had burst into flames, leaving behind something so real, so grounded, and so deeply beautiful that I knew it would last a lifetime. I smiled, leaning up on my tiptoes to kiss her again, perfectly content in the knowledge that the girl who was terrified of the world had finally completely let me be her safe harbor. End of part 8. Wow! What a journey! If you're still here, either wiping away a stray tear or just grinning at that final snowy scene under the oak tree, thank you so much for experiencing this story with me. Before you click away, I want to take a couple of minutes to really break down what we just watched. Because on the surface, this is a classic fake dating to make the ex jealous trope. But underneath, it's a deep psychological dive into vulnerability, emotional armor, and what it actually means to be seen. Let's talk about Elara Vance for a second. Throughout the story, Elara uses clothing and attitude as literal armor. The vintage leather jacket, the bespoke velvet suits, the icy stares. She has spent her entire life building a fortress to survive the toxic, high-pressure environment of her family. To the Vance family, emotions are a liability. When Elara proposed the fake dating contract, she wasn't just looking for a buffer against her mother. Subconsciously, she was looking for a safe, controlled way to experience intimacy without the terrifying risk of abandonment. Because if it's just a contract, she can't get her heart broken, right? But then there's Maya. Maya is the perfect foil to Elara. She starts the story in a place of total insecurity, literally paralyzed at a college party. But Maya's superpower is her perception. She is the only person who doesn't try to climb Elara's walls. She just sees right through them. The turning point of the entire story isn't the near kiss on the beach, it's the brunch scene. When Maya accurately describes Elara's love for romanticism, she does the one thing Elara is terrified of. She truly understands her. And that leads us to the explosive fight in the reception tent. The Elara firing Maya wasn't an act of cruelty, it was an act of pure panic. Elara Vance forced Elara to realize her feelings were showing, and Elara's survival instinct kicked in. Destroy it before it destroys you. That's why the dorm room scene is so powerful. Elara shows up soaked in rain, stripped of her expensive suits, her wealth, and her arrogance. She has to step into Maya's world, a cramped, cheap dorm room, to finally surrender. I absolutely loved putting this dynamic together. Contrast between the cold, massive Hamptons estate where they were miles apart and the tiny, warm twin bed where they finally came together is my favorite part of this narrative. But I want to know what you think. Who do you think fell first? Was it Elara when she put her arm around Maya at the very first party, or Maya when Elara zipped up her dress? Let me know your theories down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive and want more intense, high-drama WLW romances, please hit that like button, subscribe to your GL girlfriend, and share this video with a friend. Your support tells the algorithm to keep pushing these stories, and it means the absolute world to me. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.